As the election process nears its finalization, well, we're inching closer to the time where it is announced on what the outcome of the much-fated 2024 national elections are. Let's now cross back to Liesl, my colleague at the ROC at the Results Operations Center in Midrand, to get a sense of what's currently happening. A very good morning to you, Liesl.
Sams, good morning. Thank you so much. Absolutely live here at the Results Operations Center in Gallagher Estate in Midrand. We continue with our election coverage as we await the completion of the ballots, obviously, for that national picture. But we were obviously in conversation with Professor Pravesh Debba as well as Doctor Fikile Vilakazi, and we were making sense of the facts and figures, possibilities, probabilities at this hour, perhaps also what this means for the state of South Africa's political landscape as well. So good morning to the both of you once again. Of course, just for the interest of our viewers, SABC2 viewers are also joining us at this hour. We, in fact, ended off just before we spoke to our reporter, Canny, had painted the picture of what's happening at this time. About 97.18% of the national ballot votes counted. So you had spoken about a voter turnout, 58% at this time. You contrasted it to 2014 and 2019, slow decline from 75 in 2014, 75 in 2009. 72 2014, 65 2019, and about 58% this time around. Perhaps with that information, we could also look at the divide between rural and suburban areas and what that picture looks like nationally. What's the data reflecting on that front?
Okay, and so just in terms of your turnout, what we've observed is that for urban areas, the turnout tends to be higher than the rural areas. It's roughly about 6 or 7% higher, and this has been observed, throughout the years from. I've got the data 2014, 2019, and this elections as well. So roughly about 6-7% higher on the turnouts for the urban areas as compared to the rural areas. And in addition, we also see a very similar pattern happening at both the urban areas and the rural areas, in that there is a consistent decrease. For example, in the urban areas, in 2014 it was 75%, in 2019 it was 68%, and this election 60%, just the urban areas. In the rural areas, on the other hand, it was 68% in 2014, 60% in 2019, and this year it's 54% in the rural areas. And then if we look at the way in which people have voted.
Yes, we had that introduction of the 3-ballot system, and it brought some dynamics into the picture. Perhaps before I bring you into the conversation again, Dr. Fikile, let's talk to that, the comparisons, the split votes. What's been reflected according to your data at this hour?
In terms of the split votes?
Yeah, in terms of the split votes.
Okay.
With different ballots.
Yeah. So in terms of the split votes, I just need to bring up the data. Okay,
sure. As we await the technology to catch up with us. Yes. Dr. Fikile, let's see how we can unpack that. Prof, you'll give us an indication as soon as it's come through. The results, so there is about a 6 or 7% increase, higher rather in urban areas versus rural areas. Are you any surprises on that front for you? Also, when we're looking at the contributing factors, with voter turnout, what do you think it's indicative of from your vantage point?
Look, I think if you look at the urban-rural divide, there are a number of variables to look at there, particularly in terms of resources, as they're distributed between urban and rural communities. What we are seeing, for instance, in this particular election is that most of the information, for example, was shared via technological, spaces, online spaces, Twitter, Facebook, WhatsApp, and websites. And you'll find that the majority of rural communities may not necessarily have the ability to access those spaces, comparatively to what we had in the past, where you could be able to access information via normal television, whether it is a program like Good is Nice and so on, but we didn't have those kinds of programs this time around. It's quite interesting, though, a dynamic in that what the trends are saying here is what we're actually seeing playing itself out in KwaZulu-Natal, I was just asking Prof to actually take us to a place in this data
Yes.
that shows where exactly did the MK get its vote in
Yes.
KwaZulu-Natal, because I think the assumption that has been going around is that the MK has been voted by your rural KwaZulu-Natal person in Gandla and so on. But what we're finding in this data is quite surprising in that most of the votes actually came KwaMashu, you know, which is a township, and that's very, very interesting, and it's one of the strongholds of the ANC that has been consistent, you know, since 2009, standing at about 80% and so. And now 15, you know.
Yes.
So the chunk of that vote was actually taken in the urban area.
Let's unpack that a little bit further. Just to go back to Prof, has the data loaded for us? Okay,
Yes.
cool. So perhaps you could speak to what's been reflected on that front.
So on the whole, you know, if you make a summary of the 3 ballots,
Yes.
I would say people are quite consistent in the way in which they're voting. So in other words, they are choosing the same party for all 3 ballots. That's on the whole. But obviously there's some nuggets within the data as well. So if you look at, for example, ANC, they tend to vote for ANC at a national level slightly more than for the regional ballot and for the provincial ballot. It is a slight difference. So example, for the national, we're sitting at 40.15 against the regional 39.33 and the provincial 39.19. Now please also bear in mind, these are all predicted
Absolutely.
numbers.
Yeah. So could you repeat that again? So you were saying
So
nationally at about 40.19, provincially?
No, for 40.15.
Oh, 15, yes.
And regional 39.33
Yes.
and provincial ballot 39.19.
Okay.
Okay.
Gotcha.
Then another nugget one can see, for example, would be for IFP. They are voting in the reverse, so they tend to vote a little bit less for the national ballot and higher on the regional and provincial. So for IFP, it would be 3.85 on the national versus on the regional it's 4.34 and provincial 4.29. And a similar pattern also exists for Freedom Front Plus. So you can see like the slightly bigger parties, they tend to go for the national and you know, less towards the regional and provincial, whereas the slightly smaller parties, they'll do the reverse.
In reverse.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that, Dr. Fikile, at this point? And also just to go back to the point you were about to jump into when we're looking at you know, the special areas, ANC strongholds, DA strongholds. Where did MK then get its vote? But perhaps break that down a little bit further for us.
Absolutely. And I mean, so I was just saying that I think it's very important to point that out, because a lot of a couple of South Africans were saying, are we seeing the return of tribal politics here or not?
Yeah.
And the data is telling us that is not necessarily the case. I think most of the votes of the MK actually came from urban KwaMashu. But just to come to the question of the patterns between the ballots and what that tells us. I mean, we were having conversations in between, just checking that out. And what we're seeing also, let's look at tertiary institutions, you know, institutions of higher learning and how voting patterns are happening there. What you're finding that most of the students, for example, which is where most young people are and the campaigning has been happening, don't necessarily belong to political parties outside of the university. These are young people who've just turned 17 and 18, entering, you know, institutions of higher learning. They then become part of the student movements in those in those institutions, and then they are likely to what, because of voter education they're getting at that time, to vote for the national ballot. But outside of that, they don't actually commit to then voting for that particular political party, because they don't belong to the political party, they just belong to the student association. Does that make sense?
100%.
So a SASCO student is not necessarily determined to vote the ANC in a regional ballot and in a provincial ballot.
Sure, absolutely, especially because once you leave university, I mean, you enter the labor market, there are those disparities.
Exactly. Yeah. And then there's a question of wearing a jersey and then signing it differently. And it's a dynamic that has emerged even with the symbolism of the president of Mkondo Wesizwe. Introducing a new phenomenon in our politics is something that I'm actually theorizing as the polygamous identity in our politics. I mean, something I've never seen before, where someone can just say, I belong to 2 political parties and it's okay, you know. And my take was that I think just the president is really polygamous just by nature, and I think he's bringing that polygamous framework into our making of what is a political society. It's a new phenomenon, it's a developing thing, and what that has done also, it has then translated itself to members, where you're finding someone can wear an ANC t-shirt but can go to a ballot and vote the NK. And I think that probably is the swing in relation to what we're seeing in the different ballots. Because then an ANC person wearing a t-shirt of the ANC can vote ANC at national, but then decide in KwaZulu-Natal I want MK. And you know, our vote is our secret. I'm just making an example.
Sure, or in Orania, where there was one
in Orania, exactly. Vote. Yeah, absolutely, you know. Someone, I mean, who would imagine an NF vote could go to Orania? But those kinds of dynamics we've seen in this election, and it's telling us something about what is emerging in our politics, that there's no longer something like towing the line, and also rethinking ideas of democratic centralism,
yes.
Whether it is still holding its center in our politics as we enter coalitions, or where, you know, or we need to have a rearrangement of what we understand as democratic centralism, you know, which has got our own characteristics of what is emerging in this new dispensation as we mature in our democracy.
A referendum of sorts on democracy,
Absolutely.
That's been the question. A referendum on the ANC at large as well, given the dynamics unfolding.
Yeah.
Prav, thank you for those sentiments. Let's continue to unpack the data a little bit more, because from, you know, those comparisons from the ballot and also just the special areas that we've spoken about, their seat allocation data is also available.
Perhaps before we go to the seat allocation, so what you're saying, you know, we've got real data for that.
Yes.
And in fact, since commercial is fully declared, it's not predicted, it's actually actual. So what we have here is that for MK, them being a new political party that's come in, you know, they've received 69.9% of votes in commercial for MK.
Okay.
So, you know, it's quite high. Whereas for ANC, I think you've mentioned it, 2009 it was 84, 2014 it was 82.6, 2019 it was 68.1, and for the municipal elections it was 58.7. So 2021 municipal election, and it has now dropped to 15.01.
Yeah.
You know, from being in the 80s down to 15. So there you can almost clearly see that you know, the shift was from ANC to MK. You know, although we don't know exactly, because no one knows an individual vote, how they voted, but you know, in this case, you know, when you're looking at results like that, there's nothing. It's quite clear that you know, the movement here was from ANC to MK. Correct.